we can't appreciate the depth of God's grace unless we recognize the depth of our guilt. It's in looking at our guilt that we can appreciate God's grace. And in that gospel grace, God's kindness can lead us to repentance. So I'm not talking today to try to condemn you or to just sit there and make you feel paranoid and panicky. If anything, I'm trying to unlock something, to give you an invitation to get real, to be authentic. What guilt will do is it will either make you authentic and true, or it will turn you into a hoax of a person. Why? Because you'll start telling a different narrative that's not authentic and true, and you'll give people something to believe about yourself that's false. And so, with that said, let's see how Joseph's brothers are going to have their guilt awakened. Now, some of you are guests here today. Let me talk to you a little bit about Joseph in the story we're in. We're in the book of Genesis, and Joseph's this great character. He's got wonderful integrity, but here's a little family background, and let's understand the dynamics of what's happening so that you can join along in the text. So here's the deal. Joseph's dad was Jacob, and Jacob would have 12 children who would become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, God had given Jacob and his bride, Rachel, they had Joseph in their later years. And man, did Jacob favor Joseph. He gave him a coat of many colors, and the brothers resented him for it. And Joseph was given these dreams by God. But in the dreams that Joseph was given as a teenager at the age of 17, it was dreams that showed his family bowing down before him. And he went and shared this dream with his brothers, and they got even more mad. They resented their brother because their father favored him. They resented their brother because their brother said, oh, guess what? You guys are all going to bow down before me someday. In other words, Joseph's going to be raised up as a leader. And guess what? In a culture that values the firstborn as leader, when you got a young one coming along and saying, yo, all you older ones, you're going down, right? You're going to bow before me. And so what ends up happening is the brothers can't stand Joseph anymore because they're jealous of him. So what does jealousy lead us to do? Jealousy wants to get rid of the object it's jealous of. So they want to get rid of Joseph because they're jealous of him. Let's get rid of this dreamer. So what do? They sell him into slavery. And he goes over to Egypt. And then the brothers tell their dad that Joseph was basically mauled by a wild animal. So now their guilt, they don't come clean. They come up with a backstory. And then they tell their dad and mom a lie, right? And so their lie's in place. And so now with this lie in place, and by the way, Rachel's already passed on. So you could think about maybe some of his other, call it his harem or whatever. But nevertheless, he's in Egypt now, Joseph. But God raises Joseph up in Egypt, and he's in Potiphar's household, a leader of Pharaoh's. But Potiphar's wife casts her eye on Joseph. She finds him as a young stud, attractive. He looks all GQ'd out. And each day she says, lie with me, right? She had the direct approach. And he says no, and he splits, and then she accuses him of rape. So now he's sent to prison. Okay, things aren't going the best for this dreamer. He's been sold by his brothers into slavery. He's been falsely accused of rape. Now he's in prison, and he has other people in prison with him. 2 people have dreams. He interprets the dreams for them, tells one to remember him. The one forgets him. So now he's forgotten, he's forsaken, all the things. And maybe that's some of you. You know the wounds that people can cause to humanity. And maybe you're still reeling through the pain of it all. Well then, nevertheless, God gives Pharaoh 2 dreams, and then Joseph's able to interpret the dreams. Joseph's freed from the prison. Joseph's raised up as Pharaoh's right-hand man. He's governor over all of Egypt. And he interprets Pharaoh's dream to say, your dreams represent 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. And so Joseph lays out a strategy for how to save well during the famine in order to provide for the people during the famine when it comes. So save well during prosperous moments so that when the famine comes, you're ready. Bible says, a wise person sees trouble ahead and takes refuge. The fool ignores the warnings and keeps on going. And so even the idea of saving is an important aspect to our life. Now, with that context put in place, that's where we are. And now Joseph is in Egypt. He's been sold off. He's been accused falsely, but now he's Pharaoh's right-hand man, and he's been saving the goods, and a famine breaks out. And guess who's going to need some food? Joseph's brothers. And they are about to encounter their brother 20 years after the fact. And guess what they're going to be doing? They're going to be bowing down before him. And the dream is going to be fulfilled. And guilt is going to be awakened. They have been telling themselves a lie for 20 years. It's time for them to confront the truth. What lies are you telling yourself this morning? And where is it time to confront the truth? Are you living a lie? Are you believing a lie? Why does God care about truth? I mean, just think about what a lie does. It makes somebody believe that reality is one thing when in fact it is another. That's why it's important for us. We want to give people the reality of what is. We don't want to give them false teachings, false ideas. So now as we start walking through these verses together, why'd you do that, Bobby? I don't know. I just felt like it. It's what you do when you're ADD. You do weird things that just don't make sense. You have these moments, right? And Paxton said it's true, and no one's more ADD than this brother. Right? You think I'm ADD. Oh, thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, you're pointing at me too. You're like, no, you got this brother. You got him fixed. All right, so here we go. So when Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, again, Jacob is Joseph's father, and he learns that there's grain for sale in Egypt, and they're about probably, maybe 400 miles away or so from Egypt in Canaan. He said to his sons, why do you look at one another? You can just sense his resentment, right? Like you scrub brushes, do something with yourself. And he said, behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die. So it's bad, right? And think about this. Like we don't realize the privilege that we have. I mean, we freak out when our half inch of snow a year comes here and aisle 10's empty, right? But at least we've got a Harris Teeter to go to. Right? It wasn't like Jacob could be like, yo, sons, I need you to head down to Bilo. If they're closed down, don't worry about it. Cruise over to Aldi. I need you to pick up a sack of potatoes, right? It's not that way. It's a famine, and they're desperate. Verse 3, so 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Now, who's Benjamin? Benjamin's actually the youngest of the 12. He's younger than Joseph. And so he has this favoritism for Joseph and then Benjamin. Why? Because they were the two children born of Rachel, okay, and in an old age. So notice what he's doing. Well, now Benjamin can't go because he feared that harm might happen to him. Well, he's thinking about what happened to Joseph. And isn't that what can happen to us in life? We get traumatized. And then instead, we start controlling our environment so we don't have to experience that trauma again. Do you ever experience trauma and pain and wounds in your life so bad that now it'll turn you into a control freak and you start controlling your environment to try to guarantee that people won't hurt you? And we have to be aware that Jacob is operating out of trauma. Jacob's mental health, folks, is in bad shape. And you can understand why. He thinks he's lost a son. His sons have lied to him. He doesn't have the facts, and that's a tough place to live. And so we keep reading. Verse 5, thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And by the way, Egypt's the most powerful country in the world at this time. So basically, Joseph's the second most powerful ruler in the entire world, okay? This is huge. I mean, talk about being raised up. And Joseph's brothers came. They bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them. Now, remember, Joseph had a dream of like the stars bowing down, and it's happening. The dream's being fulfilled 20 years later. And it says Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. Where do you come from, he said. They said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And why wouldn't they recognize him? Because 20 years has passed, number one. Number two, he wouldn't have a beard. Egyptians were uber sanitary. And so they would shave their beards. I mean, the Egyptians created the first perfumes and, makeups and mascaras, and they shaved their head because they didn't want any lice. I mean, they were meticulous. So he's 20 years older. He would have like makeup on. He would have a shaved head, a wig, and he spoke Egyptian at the time. So he's speaking in a different language, and so they don't realize it's him. And so it says, verse 9, and Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of. Isn't that cool? Just you can read over that statement real quick, but if you just stop, really what it's saying is God fulfilled his promise 20 years later, and he was living in the midst of it. Like some of you know what that's like. God gives you a dream. God gives you a vision. You pursue it. And then to sit in the satisfaction of it coming together. Like, you know how satisfying it is for me? I can honestly tell you, some of you are here. Some of you would listen to me cast vision about a church that God has given us a vision for that's going to be diverse someday. And we're going to reach people with the gospel. And we're going to be able to help people in mental health. And you look around, and we started this thing by faith in the midst of COVID. And look what God's doing. God, when he gives us the promises, it's a pretty satisfying experience. So we keep reading, and what do we see next? Well, they're going to get criticized more. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he dreamed, and he said to them, you are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land. They said to him, no, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Yeah, right. Your servants have never been spies. Okay. He said to them, no, it is the nakedness of the land that you have come to see. And they said, no, right? We are your servants, our 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more. Oh, imagine the pain of being Joseph and hearing his brothers describe him as non-existent. One is no more. Believe the lie. But guilt needs to be aroused. And so, verse 14, but Joseph said to them, it is, as I said to you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested. And so this is where we move in now to some testing. And what Joseph is going to put them through is a guilt test. And we're going to see 3 different tests that he is going to run by his brothers before he reveals his identity. And so today they're going to get the guilt test because he wants to make sure that they acknowledge and recognize that they've really done wrong. Now, I don't know, it seems kind of fun the way Joseph, he's just going to give them a hard time. I'm like, man, if somebody sold me into a pit, I would be like, you're spies too, right? I mean, he's having fun. Watch what he's going to do right now. He's going to confine them in a little bit to prison for 3 days, right? Give them a taste of, his own medicine, their own medicine. So what do we see? We keep reading, verse 15, by this you shall be tested by the life of Pharaoh. You shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Now you can feel just them panicking, right? We got to go back and tell dad that we're going to bring our younger brother. He wasn't even allowed to come on this trip. Like, yo, what's up? Verse 19, verse 16, send one of you and let him bring your brother while you remain confined that your words may be tested, right? So it says in verse 17, he put them all together in custody for 3 days. Now, that's pretty smart because he needed to reflect. And I think that that's wise. I mean, and you can see that some reflection happened, and you want to know how? Again, careful reading of the scripture, what you see in the verses we just read, he says what? He, basically send one person back to go get Benjamin. he's going to reflect for 3 days, and he's going to back off a little bit. He's going to be a little bit more sane, and he's going to say, no, don't, you can all go back to get, just leave one here. So he changes his plan up a little bit, right? So when we see in verse 19, if you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine, and bring your youngest brother to me, so that the words may be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. Then they said to one another, in truth, check it out, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. This is why this distress has come upon us. Isn't that interesting? 20 years later, and whatever they're going through in that moment, they connect the dots and say, we are in this moment because of 20 years ago. You know, sometimes life is that way. We don't understand how to interpret things until another set of circumstances put the glasses on for us to see something clearly. And now they could see clearly. There is a direct link. There is a connection going on here. We saw the despair in our brother's eyes, and we ignored that when it arrived.